Hello and welcome to episode 205 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Shane here in Denver, Colorado, and with us on the line from Chicago, Illinois, it's the Godfather, Dave Harbarger. Dave, we are Stanless.
I know. It's heartbreaking. I saw him today. I took him to FedEx, helped him mail some stuff out to members of the Dive Down Nation. Literally the last thing he was thinking about before he got on the plane was getting out prizes to people for that giveaway that he did a couple months ago for charitable donations.
Oh, nice.
So anybody who won something from Stan's little side game, it's mostly in the mail. But yeah, I don't know what we're going to do. What are we going to do?
What are we going to do,
It's not like we
Dave?
don't know each other. We've been friends for nearly 40 years.
Yeah, way too long. That's weird to think about. Yeah, I mean, but you know what's Stan brings the special Stan energy, the special Stan viewpoint. But I think we'll be okay. I mean, we have spoiler episodes coming up. That's always a great time to talk cards. Unfortunately, I don't have any opportunity to like disagree with Stan about cards, but maybe we can get some guests on that I can disagree with loudly, and we can argue about things. It sounds great to me.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, I was trying to pick out a theme song for us to play, but I just don't have the energy to reach into my Spotify and play something like Angel by Sarah McLachlan, or my wife told me about a song called I Hope You're Dancing by, I forget the name of the country artist, Leanne Rimes. She was like, play that song. I was like, I don't know about that one. And then I was also thinking, of course, about Boys to Men. You got to play End of the Road. But he's coming back, so we don't have to be that maudlin, right?
No.
You know what he told me today? He said, I need the podcast. I need this. So he's going to be back. I don't know what he meant by that, but
We all need the podcast in our own way.
yeah. And so do you, dear listener.
And we're glad you need this podcast for some reason. But after a few weeks of fun, of award shows, of kind of just talking to Randy from Heavy Play, what we wanted to do this episode was re-engage in this great game of Magic in 2023. Wanted to take a look at what's actually been going on in the past month and a half, where you might have been thinking about, the end of the year, the parties you've been doing, the family gatherings, all that kind of stuff, the travel you've been doing, the time you might have had off work or school or something like that. But now we are back in the trenches. We have to think about what's going on in competitive Magic, what's going on in our formats of Modern and Pioneer.
Yeah, and of course, when we look at both formats, we'll also talk about any interesting decks we see along the way, notable trends we see happening right now, and also just random new stuff to consider in the whole dive down sphere. So think of it as a primer for getting back into Magic in 2023 as we are here in January. And then, of course, we have one more thing to do at the beginning of that, and that is do a preview for the exciting conclusion to the 2022 NRG Championship Series. Their invitational/finals is this weekend, January 14th, 15th. So you will have live tournament Magic to watch this weekend.
Of great players playing our formats. So I'm checking my calendar. I don't think I have a lot of plans this weekend, so I'm hyped. I'm hoping that my wife's going to really love me having Twitch on in the background all weekend.
Yeah, you're not going to come to Chicago for my birthday. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, crap. I didn't get an invite.
And nobody did.
But before we get into all that, we have some quick housekeeping. We have 3 new patrons, new citizens of the Dive Down Nation. We have James K., Sassway, and Connor K., no relation to James, I imagine.
The K brothers. The brothers K.
K friends, Sassway friends, we appreciate you all joining the Dive Down Nation, getting your passport stamped as you crossed our borders into the lovely world of the Dive Down. We also have a new review, an awesome review from Philmatic19. I'm going to just assume that's an Illmatic reference. So I also love Nas, my friend. It's nice to have someone tell you you're funny, even though I don't think we are.
Yeah, I have my concerns about this. This just says it's good, and then it says they forgot the podcast can be both educational and entertaining. We're funny and good hosts. Somehow, the episodes certainly don't feel as long as they actually are. What do you think? Do these episodes feel as long as they are to you, or
when
do they feel
listen to them? For
do they feel
time.
longer as we're making them? That's my question.
Well, after the recording and the final listen to, and then listening to it after it goes live for some wild reason where I'm like, did I miss anything? I do get tired of hearing myself. But if you want to join the Patreon, join the Dive Down Nation, you can go to patreon.com/the Dive Down. It's the best way to give us your direct support. In exchange, you get to join our Discord. You get some episodes early if you're at the $5 tier. You get deck boxes at the $5 tier. You get tokens and stickers and pins and such just at the $3 tier, I believe. Playmats, you could work on a custom episode with us every 6 months or so. Those are the kind of perks you can enjoy. Make 2023 the year, if you haven't already, get in the Patreon.
That's right. And if you want to support us in a couple of other ways, the first one, the easiest one, is if you want to get yourself some swag, go check out the divedown.com/store. Grab a hat, grab a hoodie, grab a fanny pack, whatever. That's a way to support us directly. If you don't want to have money go through Patreon, if you would like to support us while playing Magic Online, you can check out Mana Traders. Our code for Mana Traders is the DiveDown10. That will get you 10% off your first 2 months of playing Magic the Gathering on Magic Online. Longtime users of Mana Traders love them. Couldn't really do the show without them. Couldn't really play Magic without them, I've decided. So manatraders.com, check it out, the Dive-Down 10. And then a couple more things. You can go to Barrister and Mann to get some great grooming and body products, shaving products from our good friend Will at Barrister and Mann. Code there is the Dive-Down15 at Barrister and Mann, where you can get 15% off your first order. Shane, you want to do the Barrister and Mann plug right now? What do you got going on for Barrister and Mann this week?
Man, my friend Dave, I have like 6 shaving soaps I just sort of rotate through. And
6?
Yeah, I mean, I have like 4 tubs and
4 tubs.
At least 5 tubs and 2 sample bars at least.
Oh my gosh.
And, I mean, Will knows that I love the shaving soap, so he sends me these samples, and I've even bought some, right? And this was a Legrand Chypre week for me.
Okay.
I have both the soap and the aftershave splash. And there's something really special about Legrand Chypre where it doesn't smell like anything else I've had from Barrister and Mann, although nothing that I've had from Barrister and Mann smells like anything else from Barrister and Mann, which is kind of like one of the best things about it. But yeah, Chypre is great. And I'm still loving the Taiga soap that's on my counter in my soap dish that I mentioned a few weeks ago. What are you into?
You know, I'm still just using the soaps and the beard oils, and right now I'm back to my old favorite Seville in the beard oils, and I'm using Leviathan soap right now in the grooming section. I
have some Leviathan soap. Is that the one that you all says like is actually kind of like a dark suds?
No, I think that's a different one. Yeah.
Okay. I need to bust out some Leviathan soon. I just need to have like 3 soap dishes is really what I need to move to.
Well, Nicole 2 weeks ago, you told us about how you bought 1 soap dish.
Yeah, and now I need 3.
Now you have 3.
No, I mean, I need 3. I don't have 3. Yeah. I need to have, spaced out. Anyway, right. If you want to enjoy the variety of fragrances and products over at Barrister and Mann and save 15% off your first order, use code the Dive-Down15. That's Barrister and Mann, MANN.
That's right. You can also, if you want to support us by buying paper cards, and actually we don't get a kickback from this, but if you want to get a discount on paper cards, go check out Nerd Rage Gaming. You'll get 8% off cards that you buy from them if you use the code DIVE8. And then finally, one last little plug, because this is going to come out right before the Kickstarter closes. We talked to Randy from Heavy Play last week. If you haven't heard about Heavy Play, it's a new line of Magic accessories, boxes, that kind of stuff. Again, not something we're getting any kickback for this, but go check out the Kickstarter at heavyplay.com. You've got a couple more days to check it out.
It did hit its goal.
It did?
So the dive down bump, yeah, it had a huge influx of backers in the past few days. So just like Randy said, either way, I was going to get funded. And so I'm glad to see that it has. And yeah, the stuff's really good. We mentioned this in the interview. I mentioned that I had not received it yet. And again, this is just me saying, bottom of my heart, I think this is some really good stuff. Like I'm loving the deck boxes and the playmat, and like the dice box is super rad. Like I totally did not appreciate like how annoying it was to like have my dice in like one of my towers and then have to like move the cards into that tower in order to keep the dice with it. Like just having the dice in their own little box, it just like snaps whatever deck I'm bringing that night and just like slap it to the playmat. Like it works really well. And the products, like the magnet motion is really great. Anyway, we've talked a lot about Heavy Play and I don't want to sound like we're just shilling, but it's good stuff.
And also we've had a lot of codes right here, but yeah, check out heavyplay.com. Check out that Kickstarter if you're interested. Just a reminder more than anything else.
Oh my gosh, Dave, so much preamble before we got into any content.
That's okay. People apparently use the 30-second skip button on things sometimes. I'm starting to see it showing up on our Spotify curves, people. I get the message, okay? And I saw Chris CCR from MTG Rants talking about using the skip button on podcast the other day, on Magic Podcast the other day on Twitter.
Broadcast?
And I felt subtweeted, I will say. He did not confirm or deny that he was talking about us.
I mean, you know, some days just gotta skip some things. Let's get into some content.
Yep.
Dave, I noticed you switched this into 5 things, not just a few things. We have 5 separate categories of what's going on in Magic right now.
Yep. The 5-part primer of going into 2023 for Magic.
What's our first one?
Well, I thought the best thing to start with would be, like I alluded to earlier, high-level competition coming in this weekend. Like I said, the NRG Championship Series Invitational, the finals, is the 14th and 15th this week. So all of that tournament series that went on last year, for all the coverage that we did, it comes down to these 16 players who made it.
I honestly, I can't believe it's here. Like, I didn't really realize, like, just how many events NRG had and how much we really, wanted to and were happy to cover these events. And so I'm amped to see that we finally do the championship. The 16 players are all truly excellent. I'm amped to see them, go head to head in the event this coming up weekend for sure.
So 16 great players. I'm just going to read off their names right now, just so we can kind of know who's in it, where they came from, because they are a lot of notable people. And people that we've had on the show, honestly. So it's Ivan Espinoza, who was the 2020-2021 champion, Piper Powell, Season 1 Showdown champion, Joe Bernal, Season 1 at large, Andrew Ellenbogen, Season 1 at large, Connor Mullally, Season 2 Showdown, Theo Young, Season 2 Showdown, Max Kamenowski, Season 2 Showdown, Jesse Robkin, Season 2 at large, Nicole Dubin, Season 2 at large, Derek Davis, Season 3 Showdown, Raja Suleiman, Season 3 at large, Zach Allen, Season 3 at large, Adam Washburn Moses, overall at large, Zoe Riederman, overall at large, Will Kruger, overall at large, and Mac Endress, overall at large. It's a lot of people. A lot of people that we've been watching all year.
Yeah, I mean, these people ground this out, right? Like these are some awesome players who did really well either in particular tournaments and were able to kind of sit back a little bit or just played steadily all year, and we talked about them all year. So it's impressive to see this group of people together.
Yeah. So there's the players in the tournament this weekend. But here's the thing that's really interesting about the championship series is that all of these invitational tournaments, they have really interesting structures, and we might as well talk about this one really quickly because this one is wild. So these people are going to be organized into 2 different pods of 8 players, essentially. Some of the points leaders, I forget which players, maybe it's the season champion, has the ability to change one player out of their pod for a player into their pod. Like they get to move around some of the pairings, which is also pretty interesting. And then it's in 4 stages, essentially. It's a mixed Modern and Pioneer tournament. Stage 1 is the largest stage of the tournament. Everybody in the tournament is going to play against every other person in their pod. So they split the 16 into 2 pods of 8. Those people are each going to play each other. It's 3 rounds of Modern and then 4 rounds of Pioneer across those 7 matches. So they're going to play 3 rounds, then they're going to switch of Modern, and they're going to switch to Pioneer.
And this is a group of 8 people, so they're going to play everyone.
They're going to play every person.
Yeah.
That's right. And then after stage 1, the bottom 2 people from each pod are eliminated, and the top 2 seeds of each pod get to go basically to the quarterfinals. So they get to skip over stage 2, the people who kind of do the best in this 7-match pairing area. So what happens then is the people that are left over, the 8 players that finish 3rd through 6th in each pod, make a new 8-player pod.
So this is kind of like the losers bracket. Maybe like if you're thinking about like a tournament. They're not losers bracket. They're playing to make the quarters.
Right. So those people play 3 rounds, double elimination against each other in Modern, in a new pod. So if you win 2 matches when you're in stage 2, you move on to stage 3. After all that, we'll have 8 people entering their day 2. There'll be 4 people that skip stage 2 and 4 people that manage to get 2 wins in stage 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're winnowing down.
Yeah.
Then in stage 3, it's double elimination Pioneer for 3 rounds. So win 2 and you make stage 4.
Yep.
Okay. So that should cut it down to 4 people at that point. And those people will play each other in a best 2 out of 3 match set. So I think they have to play, if I'm reading this right, they're going to play matches against each other, best 2 of 3 matches. And they will, the first seed in each matchup gets to pick which format they want to do, and they get to pick if they want to play or draw in game 1.
Awesome.
Then they'll play a match. Then the second seed person picks either format, and they get their draw in the second match. And then in the third match, if they do it again, it's the opposite of match 2. First seed gets to pick choice of play draw in game 1. So people are going to be deciding, oh, I want to play this person in Modern, or I don't want to play this person in Pioneer. My Pioneer deck matches up better against their Pioneer deck. So it's going to be some wild gamesmanship, I think.
This is awesome. Do you think, do they get to only pick one deck for the weekend? Like, they don't get to switch around their decks, right? They just have a Modern deck and a Pioneer deck for the whole weekend.
I have to think, yes.
Yeah, that would be absurd otherwise. But like, this is the kind of tournament that I think players like this really get to have some fun and some expertise and some leveling in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because this is what happens, if you think about some of the small field tournaments that we've seen, like the mocks or some of these online tournaments, the Magic Online tournaments, where we saw, I believe it was even Will Kruger, actually, who's in this tournament as well, who won a Modern mocks finals by playing Scape Shift in a field that was all Shadow
decks. No,
it was
all
Yorion and Shadow. Like, it was like 4 Yorion decks, 3 Shadow decks, and 1 Scape Shift deck. And they... Will won that tournament by metagaming. So we could have some really interesting things happen where it's possible that the Pioneer field will be just 3 decks somehow split up between these 16 people. And we won't really know how or why they did that, but that's what happened. Or it's possible that everybody will bring their pet decks to Modern. It's possible that everything could be really meta. It's possible that someone could play a deck that they would never play in an open field tournament, but they'll play it here because of the players they're expecting to be against right now. So there could be some weird tech. We'll try to learn as much as we can from the tournament. We're going to cover this tournament a little bit in depth next week as far as who won, and we'll talk a little bit about what decks kind of rose to the top and what notable things happened. But, I think it'll just be an interesting thing to watch. And this is one of the highest level Magic tournaments we've had in a minute, especially in paper. So good thing to watch on Twitch this weekend. Coverage starts at 10 a.m. Central on Saturday and Sunday. So keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Shane, what do you think? Let's just have some fun for a minute here. Let's make some unsubstantiated calls. What do you think is going to be the most popular Modern deck among these 16 people?
Ooh, okay. Among these 16 people, I would not be surprised to see 3 copies each of Jeskai Breach and Hammer.
I love it. It's exactly the same thing I was going to say. Was everything else I think will be less than that, but I think there's a good shot that there's 3 copies of each of those decks. Great way to put it.
Yeah, that's my thought. That's my thinking for Pioneer. What do you think about Modern?
No, you just said Modern. How about Pioneer?
Oh yeah, those
unless
are
there's
Modern
Jeskai
decks.
Breach and Pioneer now.
Those are Modern decks. Pioneer, where things get a little bit off the rails. Like we're going to talk about Pioneer a little bit later in this episode, of course. But I don't know what has the biggest edge in that format, right? Where it's like,
I agree. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later based on the RCQ stuff and Frank Karsten's most recent metagame article. But just to make a shot in the dark, Pioneer, I'm going to say I think that Blue-White Control is the most popular deck with this group of people. When I see Roger Suleiman, Zach Allen, Joe Bernal, and I think even Andrew Ellenbogen are people who generally play decks like that.
Fully foiled Azorius control decks.
Well, that's Zach. I don't think that's necessarily Andrew. That's definitely Zach and Joe Bernal. Joe Bernal, local Chicago player who is kind of well known for playing control a lot of the time.
For sure.
And Roger Slyman, for sure, well known for playing control quite frequently too.
I never, ever, ever wanted to sit across from Joe Bernal. Like,
Nope.
In the local events. No, never. Would not even want to be next to him because he scares me. He's so good.
It's happened to me a couple of times, and I have never won. So,
Well,
right.
I'm looking forward to this. I'm definitely going to try to watch as much as possible and then watch some replays as we prepare for the episode coming up.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to talk about really quickly was the future of the Nerd Rage Gaming series.
Oh, yeah.
So recently, on December 10th, Max Kahn, who's the organizer of the series, well-known judge and Magic player around Chicago, and someone who's basically helped organize the Nerd Rage Gaming circuit for a long time, they are going to do a scaled-down version of the series this year, but it's still going to be really great, I think. So their plan right now is to do 7 weekends of tournaments with 2 events per weekend, where they're going to have the same thing that they've been doing now. They'll have a Saturday event that's a $10,000 trial and a Sunday event that's a $5,000 trial. And they're going to do 7 of those throughout the year. They're going to have 1 leaderboard for the entire year this time. And so we're going to see people racing to be the points leaders across all of 2023. Right now, they have 3 events announced so far for the first half of the year.
So this is kind of like a mini SCG, right? Like kind of like they had the points that kind of went throughout the entire year of SCG.
I think SCG had seasons similar to how Nerd Rage did it this year. I think that Nerd Rage is trying to make it a little more simple and just cut back, I think, on the number of events that they had this year. They had a lot. And so with 7 events, we have 1 in March, 1 in May, and 1 in June. Right now, 2 of those are scheduled in Mundelein. 1 is in Minneapolis, and we'll kind of see where they go from the rest of the year from there. But that is the future of NRG for next year, at least.
Sweet. Looking forward to that.
Oh, and I should mention, they're also going to do stuff that's a little more focused on side events, and they're going to have a command zone and some other stuff like that. So I think they're going to try to make it a little more open to the general public as opposed to just being for the grinders. Yeah.
Smart. Well, after NRG, as we promised, we want to look more deeply into the 2 primary formats we cover in Modern and Pioneer. And I was fortunate enough to flip the coin and get Modern. And what I thought we should do is because, we haven't really talked too deeply about Modern for a while now. But what I wanted to start with was looking back at one of Frank Karsten's Metagame Mentor articles about Modern. And the last one that he published was December 15th. And what he looked at was November through December's information. And I thought this would give us kind of what we're working with in December. I don't think there's anything really surprising here because it's the end of the year. It had been pretty stable in Modern metagame developments up until that point. And so pretty quickly, we saw it's at Murktide at 13.4%, even though it had a pretty statistically average win rate. Murktide was maintaining its top position in the meta. We saw Hammer Time at 11.9%, which was a rise at that point. One of the most winningest decks. Hammer Time, continued its rise up the charts. Rakdos Undying or Scam at 10.2%, also a rising up-and-comer at that point. Surprisingly stable over the past few months in Modern, not really kind of going anywhere and maintaining its sort of tier 1 status, really. And then we had a drop off. We saw Jeskai Breach at 5.7. This had kind of reached the point where enough people had felt comfortable busting this out and playing this deck in tournaments. We saw 4-color Omnath still at 5.3% and perhaps underrepresented due to a 55% win rate.
Told you.
I know.
Still reasonable.
And that was according to MTG decks over the past 2 months is where I pulled that number from. Rhinos at 4.9. Our favorite Crasher is still maintaining that, tier 2 relatively popular position in the meta. 4 and 5 color Creativity was at 4.2%. From November to December. This had been dropping a bit in popularity. People having figured out the weapons against it. Omnath decks were also dropping in popularity, which brought that down with it. Burn at 3.9%. It's a real burn meta out there. Domain Zoo at 3.7%. Surprisingly statistically decent here.
Is that deck just basically what we would think it is? Like,
Yes.
Does it have Scion of Draco in it
Yes.
still? Like, is it that whole thing?
Yeah, the Sign of Draco, it has multicolor cards. It might have like a Sir Roderick or Rockerick. It might have like
A General Ferris Rockerick.
Yes, it might have a Geist of St. Traft if you're feeling really sneaky. I noticed one or two of those some places. So
I saw it on a list the other day and I was like, what year is it?
Geist is back, baby.
What's that gif of like, is it Robin Williams from the Fisher King running around being like, what year is it?
And then 10th place, Yawgmoth, 3.2%. Never huge in the meta. Yawg had been seeing some poor matchups against things like Scam, and it has a middling Murktide matchup statistically. And so maybe that's just kind of naturally keeping the popularity of this deck down. But the surprises for me in this top 10, in, again, the December check-in, both Amulet Titan and Living End were on the outside looking in. And Domain Zoo had been popular enough even to surpass Yawgmoth at the ninth place there. So since that article, not that much has really happened tournament-wise, besides MTGO events. But we did have two really large events, honestly. We had the 2022 Mana Traders 30K Invitational on December 18th, and the Modern Super Qualifier on December 26th, which is a challenging date for many, but there's a lot of people there, as we'll get into. These, of course, are pretty high important events. We might as well go over what happened in those two. The Mana Traders 30K, we have the top 11 for some reason. I'll go to the top, let's talk about the top 8. We saw Capricosio on Amulet Titan in first seed. Somewhat classic deck list here with 2 Sakura Tribe Elder, 2 Azusa. Did have a singleton Cultivator Colossus. Second place, we saw Skinnerus McQuox on Murktide. Third, we saw Magic of Player 1 on Murktide. Fourth, we saw Raging Machismo on Dredge. This is a 4-color build with no green, running Otherworldly Gaze and Thrilling Discovery.
I got to tell you, I was looking through some modern prelims and stuff like that over the last few days, and if Dredge is starting to pop up again, interestingly enough, surprisingly, but yeah.
Cool. 5th place, Happy Sandwich on Azorius Hammer. 6th place, Gol Ducat on 5-color Creativity. 7th place, Anson 95 on Murktide. 8th place, Nakashima on Jund Creativity. I hadn't really noticed Jund Creativity becoming a thing, but this version seems to focus a bit more on the hand and board interaction. It has 4 Thoughtseize, a few Fatal Push, a full playset of Bolts, but also loads up on the full playset of Persist. And to take advantage of that, the deck's running 4 Bitter Reunion from Brothers War, which is that 1 in a red enchantment. When it ETBs, you can discard a card to draw 2 cards. You can also then pay 1, sacrifice it, and give your creatures haste. So this is pretty obviously a great way to immediately get your Archon swinging. So it's not absurd to imagine something like play Bitter Reunion on 2, discard an Archon, then you untap, persist your Archon back, and pay the 1 that you have left over to sack your Bitter Reunion. Of course, that's the nut draw. It's a 3-card combo, effectively. But, that can come together, and that's definitely a great turn 3.
Yeah, but at least most of those cards do other things at other points in your plan, right? Particularly Bitter Reunion, which is fine as just something that helps you draw through your deck. The one thing that these decks don't get, that the 4-color decks get, is that they, the 4-color decks run Expressive Iteration, right? And this is sort of, hey, it's an Expressive Iteration-esque card. Not esque, because Expressive Iteration is one of the best cards of the last 5 years. But this is a card that still lets you get through your deck and draw cards, but has some utility in a Reanimator plan.
So yeah, I don't really have a ton of metagame breakdown on this tournament, but that's a pretty interesting top 8. Just after talking about Amulet Titan being out of the top 10, Capricosio comes back and wins with this.
You don't want to talk about the rest of the top 11?
What do we have? We have quickly. Mental
2 more
Misstep.
Murktide decks.
Yeah, Mental Misstep and O Danielakos on Murktide, and then Toscanini, that's my favorite pasta, on kind of a 5-color Omnath build.
5-color Omnath build.
Yeah,
with
Karuga.
2 portal. This is not an Omnath. This is Shape Anew. This is a Portal to Phyrexia plus Omnath plus Karuga deck. This is your slightly different version of creativity, basically.
Yeah, so this is something I should have actually looked at for our upcoming Cool Decks Inc. section, because we haven't really talked about the Shape Anew decks. Let's just read this card because it's almost like the first time I've read it, like in the past month. Shape Anew, 3 in the blue sorcery. The controller of target artifact sacrifices it. So what do you target the artifact and its controller sacrifices it. Then then reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal an artifact card. That player puts that card onto the battlefield and shuffles all cards revealed this way into their library. So what? You have no natural artifacts besides Portal, so you make like a treasure token with Fable, or what else? Like, what else can you make that you can sacrifice really easily? You have Gingerbread Cabin, makes a food.
You're using, it's basically Gingerbread Cabin or Fable.
Okay,
here.
And then you basically do like a basically a transmogrify into Portal to Phyrexia.
Right.
Cool.
And Portal, and you have a bunch of comes into play effects. So Portal lets you bring back creatures that have powerful comes into play effects if you want. You know, you fill your graveyard with evoke elementals, or you can get stuff that your opponent played as well.
Fun. That's my kind of deck.
I think it's cool.
Not at all.
You know, Spike has been playing around with this deck, had been probably a month ago at this point, and I think this is just like an interesting other version of what's essentially, like I said a minute ago, a dominable creativity. If you look at this top 8, top 11, really, you know, there's three creativity decks if you count Shape Anew. Let's count the 3 transmogrify decks. Yeah, which is interesting to see people building around that idea.
Pretty wild, pretty fun. But we do have a lot more data from the Modern Super Qualifier event. There was 401 players. It's a 10-round tournament, the top 4 of which get RC invites. So this is legit. There's a lot of prizing for these things. Bamzing, of course, did God's work, gave us all 55 decks that went 7-3 or better. And here's the breakdown of those. 9 isn't Murktide, or 16.3%. And then we have immediately a big drop to 5 copies, or 9% each, of Hammer decks. There was 4 Azorius, 1 mono white. There was 5 Rhinos, 3 of which were 4/5 color and 2 teamer, and then 5 burn. It's real burn meta. We had 4 copies, or 7.2%, of Yawgmoth, Amulet Titan, and Living End. So Living End and Amulet Titan kind of coming back out of relative dormancy to be 7% of this, the winner's meta, essentially, the 7-3 or better decks. Then we get into 3 copies, or 5.4%, of Breach-style decks, 2 Jeskai, 1 teamer. We have 3 creativity decks, 2 4-color, 1 5-color, if that matters to you. And then 3 Rakdos Scam. And then we have 2 copies, or 3.6%, of Azorius Control and Izzet Prowess. And then 6 one-ofs. Let's just blow through them. Gruul Panza, Belcher, Bring to Light Scapeshift, 4-color Omnath, Azorius Urza, and Fish. So, Dave, what are your thoughts here?
My head is spinning a little bit here. Wow, this is a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff.
So these are the 55 players that went 7-3 or better.
Yeah.
And there's like 20 decks in this bracket that went 7-3 or better in this 400-player tournament. That seems like pretty cool amount of diversity to me.
Yeah, that's rules. I mean, all of these decks are capable of performing in a really highly competitive event, like even Burn. But yeah, I mean, besides Murktide at 16%, which is kind of, I think, where we've seen a lot of Murktide hanging out lately, is in the teens. But, you know, we have Hammer, Rhinos, Burn, Yawgmoth, Amulet, Living End, you know, all kind of different types of strategies. We have, you know, unfair mid-range. We have even control decks, even have some prowess decks. So this bodes well to me, just as general overall winners meta.
People love Murktide on Magic Online.
They really do.
There's just no way around it. I mean, I know it's a pricey deck to play even in Magic Online, and still, I guess it's not that pricey. I'm looking at it right now. It's 563 tickets. That's a little less than I thought.
That's not so bad. I mean, that's very rentable.
All these decks look very rentable suddenly, by the way.
Dave, what's the most expensive Magic Online deck on Goldfish?
I mean, for a while, it was 4-color Omnath.
Yeah, it's like 1,1600 tickets, right?
Yeah, but I don't see it. Surprisingly, Elementals is the highest one I see on this list I'm looking at right now at 763 tickets.
Yeah, wow. I mean, Footfalls is the most expensive one.
Oh,
875
is it?
tickets. I mean, most expensive besides, like you said, kind of like the Omnath decks. But like, yeah, Footfalls isn't cheap. I'm impressed with how reasonably priced a lot of Magic Online is looking right now. Then, so get over to manatraders.com.
Turn your subscriptions back on. Use our code. Help us
Use
out.
our code. So let's talk about the top 8, though. We had Nils Fit on Jeskai Breach, which is not your normal Jeskai Breach. I'm going to talk more about this in a later section of this episode. We had XAKX47X on Is It Murktide. They went 10-3. Nils Fit went 11-2 overall in the tournament, meaning they won out. There's a Singleton Borrower, Dress Down for Spice, and this Is It Murktide list. Spider Space, our old buddy Spider Space, on 5-color creativity yet again, making his way to the RC. Congratulations, Gabe, going 10-2 overall on 5-color creativity. AFX, I loved Analog Bubble Bath 1 and 2 AFX.
My favorite was always the song that he made out of
R2D2 noises.
Yeah, popcorn. Right?
It's really good. Rakdos Scam, my kind of scam list: 3 Feign Death, 3 Undying Malice, none of the bad Undying cards, playsets of all the creatures, 2 Blood Moon, 2 Fable. Just split the difference on those, my friend. Perfect list.
Please and thank you.
Then we have 5, 6, and 7, all on Is It Murktide. We've got TX EPI, we've got Azuli 86, and we've got McWin Sauce. All of these lists are within like a few cards of each other, and this all Is It Murktide.
Yeah, well, McWin Sauce, longtime good Magic Online player.
Yeah.
He's still here.
And speaking of another good Magic Online player, we have got Claudio on Yawgmoth in 8th place.
Bam.
So there's kind of our big tournaments. Let's look at the current state of the modern metagame overall. So what I did for here, after we talked about kind of Frank's December update, we talked about the 2 tournaments that happened. I looked at MTG Decks, which is a really handy website, to look at the higher level tournament aggregate data on popularity and win rates of the top 10 decks over the last 30 days. And so we can this is basically what happened between December 9th and January 9th. We have Is It Murktide at 16.2%. This is a big upward trend recently. As we've seen in the previous tournament results, it even has a slightly above 50% win rate across 785 tracked matches on MTG decks. So Is It Murktide is slightly above 50%, but still the most popular deck in the room by about 5.5%.
I mean, it certainly looks that way from the tournaments you just went over as well, so I don't think we should be as surprised.
No.
And also, the top 8s of these tournaments were also, well, I guess we didn't have general metadata from the Mana Traders.
No.
Right? No, did we? No,
not that I had access to.
But it was like 4 or 5 of the top 11 decks were Murktide.
Yeah.
Frank's article had it at 13%. The modern qualifier was at 16% in the bracket where people did 7 and 3 or better. And then here we go. It says that the general meta is also 16.2% Murktide.
Yeah, it's a lot. But in second place, perhaps unsurprisingly, we've got Hammer at 10.7%, staying steady as a second most popular deck. It also has a very good win rate, as we've been mentioning whenever we talked about this deck, at 54% over the past 30 days.
Unless I'm piloting it.
Yeah, I mean, unless one of us is piloting it.
Although I have to say, still doing pretty good with Hammer these days. Better.
That's great. I mean, 54% doesn't feel amazing, but, it adds up over the aggregate. We've got third place Rakdos Scam also staying steady at 8.2% with a disappointing 48% win rate in the past month. We've got Creativity Decks next, staying strong at 5.3% with a 55% win rate. Up after that, Cascade at 5.3%, also staying the same as Creativity, showing indications of a little bit of resurging popularity. We've seen it do well in tournaments. I think it won a recent tournament that we did not cover in this episode, albeit it does have a middling, like 49% win rate. And now we get to a lot of decks that just haven't moved around much in their metagame percentages since December. We've got Burn, 4.72, a 41% win rate. Please stop playing Burn unless you are really good with Burn. But if you like Burn, just play it. Jeskai Breach at 4% with a 51% win rate. Yogg at 3.6, 48% win rate. Amulet Titan at 3.5% with a 51% win rate. And Living End at 3.2% with a 53% win rate. Dave, does any of this information surprise you? Do you have any insights on it? Any immediate thoughts?
I just feel like all of my preconceived notions about Modern have been confirmed. I don't find any of them concerning, really.
No, not at all.
Right? Like, none of this is concerning, but it's amazing to see that things have been so stable over the last 6 weeks or
stable.
so.
I mean, I feel like Modern's been stable for like 4 months. I feel like, besides maybe the slight rise of Breach into like a 4% metagame share, this is just like what Modern is low tide, right? Like just a lot of Visit Murktide. Hammer continuing to kind of be like just perhaps the best deck in the room that a few people just aren't playing. After Scam had its people notice it and start playing it, it's been kind of like the third or fourth most played deck. So these are all things like I'm not super surprised about anymore. I guess I would have suspected a slightly stronger surge for Breach, because I feel like Breach is like a card that a lot of people are talking about recently.
Oh yeah. And people are playing it all over the place now. So we've talked about this a few times, but Spike has been playing, I think that in the Magic, I think in the qualifier that you were talking about, the Modern Super Qualifier, Everett actually played Shadow with Breach, which is another new thing that's emerged recently, is playing Death Shadow with Breach and playing Breach in Prowess and playing it in, I saw it in Murktide as a other day, just as like a one of card draw engine for like late game, I would assume.
That's wild.
But yeah, there are people trying Breach in all kinds of different things now. Now, of course, that's very different from the varieties of just Breach combo decks that are going. But Shane, are you going to talk about the weird Breach deck now, or do you want to talk about it later?
Let's just talk about it later. I guess what I want to talk about now, though, Dave, is like, what do you think, or would you suggest, or would you want to do in this environment right now? Because that's kind of like what I was hoping when we were doing this is like kind of come out of this with like an idea of, hey, I'm a Modern player. I want to kind of see what's going on, and like I haven't really played much in the last 6 weeks. What should I be thinking about or expecting as I'm going to my LGS or going to like maybe an upcoming like RCQ or something like that? And it's like, it's the same thing it was 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. As far as what I've been doing lately, like I talked about last week, I've been trying to add more decks to my arsenal. But if you look at this top list, I mean, these are all decks that I have played in the last year and tried more than others. And certainly amongst the people on the show, we've all played these decks at a decent amount. But the top three, Murktide, Hammer, and Scam, are all things I feel reasonably understanding of, and would be happy to play any of those at LGS for an FNM. Hammer's my focus right now, but the other two decks are certainly good, and I really like playing Scam. I like Murktide okay. One thing I would say is it's a lot of Ragavan at the top of the meta. Yeah. If you look at Rakdos plus Izzet, like that's kind of one thing to keep in mind, but I don't know. What do you think, Shane?
I think I would. What I like about this is that the majority of the Modern meta is like close to 50%. You can likely play what you want besides Burn, or get really good with Hammer, right? Like I think that Hammer has consistently been the best performing deck across the past few months, besides potentially Creativity. But like at the casual Spike level, I feel like this has to be kind of one of the best Modern metas that one can hope for. Like nothing seems really broken. Nothing seems too overly represented. Besides, you have to have some kind of plan against Murktide, some kind of plan against Hammer, maybe some plan against having some resiliency or hate against Scam. But like largely, you can play what you want. You can get good at a deck that you want, and turn that 49% into a 51% with reps and expertise and things like that. Or maybe just the 2 weeks the deck runs hot instead of runs cold. And I think that's a really good place for our format to be.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way too. I felt that way about Modern for a while. I imagine some people are starting to be a little feeling like this is getting stale at this point, but at least there's a lot of different decks to play, and I feel like they're pretty interactive. So I don't know. This still feels fun to me. Surprise, I do a podcast about Modern mostly.
Yeah, it's fun for you.
It still feels fun to me after 4 years. So, thank you, Lord, I guess. But, here we are.
Awesome. Well, that is Modern.
Well, Shane, what decks are you going to be playing, though?
So, I mean, of course, I'm going to always bust out rhinos here and there. But I think if we're talking about like some new experiments, some new learnings, I think I do need to like play a lot more with Scam. Like I get to play my favorite, one of my favorite cards, that being Thoughtseize. And I
thought you were going to say Blood Moon.
I mean, also, yeah, I get to play a lot of my favorite cards in this deck, right? I mean, I get to play the card that I thought was potentially going to be broken in Dothy Voidwalker. I get to play Grief and Fury and Blood Moon and Seasoned Pyromancer and Ragavan. And so it's just like a lot of stuff I really like playing. And like, I'm not learning. I mean, I'm always learning something new when I play Rhinos, but I think I can get a lot more learning by playing Scam at this point. And so, I get a lot of like full arts of those cards. I get to like mess around with those and have some fun. So I think I'll try to lean more into the Scam end of things than Rhinos, but because I can always fall back on Rhinos as like a deck I understand and have fun with.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's an interesting deck for sure. I've enjoyed Scam a lot, so that's a good choice.
Sweet.
One thing that's super interesting, I think, about these top three decks is that they're all sort of, I mean, and maybe this isn't that, I don't know, maybe this isn't that interesting, but to me, they all feel like decks that land a cheap big threat and then protect it with 1 mana spells. Like, Is It Murktide, Hammer, and Scam are all similar in that way. And how effective they do it is different, but, the Feign Death spells are reasonable as protection in Scam. Hammer has, of course, taken to running Blacksmith Skill and Spell Pierce, and then Is It Murktide is just the top deck of playing counter spells and playing Spell Pierces and things like that to protect your. So they're all these decks are Shadow. That's what I'm saying. These are like good versions of Shadow.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when I look at Shadow, I'm always just like, how is this deck not better? You got a million like 1 and 2 mana spells. You have super cheap threats. They can get big. What's going on here? But maybe just decks like you said, maybe these other decks are just doing it in the same way, also doing cheap things, but have the power of elementals behind them.
Yeah, not Hammer. No elementals on Hammer, but
Good
anyway.
Point. I mean, it could. That'd just be weird. So, Dave, I'm done with Modern, and you've got Pioneer to talk about.
Yes. So this is going to be a little shorter segment, although it has almost as much data. It's just one single data set. So Pioneer RCQ results are in, and they are weird. That's the number 3 thing on our list today. So Pioneer was a huge focus for competitive Magic last year, especially towards the end of the year.
So much data.
Exactly. As we got through people's RCQs and got to the actual RCs being played. Thanks to all those being played in November and December, there's a lot of data from very high level play all around the same time, which hasn't really happened too much lately, other than outside of Magic Online, of course. It's a data set the size of a Grand Prix. It's 2,900 players. It's almost like a huge Grand Prix because this is like 2,900 players who made day 2 is kind of how I'm thinking about what the RCs were. So we've mentioned Frank Karsten once already this episode. His most recent Metagame Mentor article from a few days ago, January 5th, was all about Pioneer, looking at the lens of what data came in from all these RCs, not RCQs. These are the RCs. Shane, does that seem fair? This is a day 2 meta for a giant Grand Prix, basically.
Dave, do you think that means anything to anyone anymore?
Yeah, I guess not, unfortunately. I wish it did, but it doesn't. So these are people who are reasonably invested in doing well and probably did a lot of testing overall. He used the corresponding MTG Melee pages to pull his deck list together. I'm really hoping, Frank, that you know about fixing the deck titles.
He's mentioned it. He's mentioned it before. He fixed it.
Okay, good. All right, well, I think that what we're going to do is try to bounce around in different groups of what these decks are. So he ended up ranking 25 decks by percentage of the field and match win rate.
25 decks, Frank.
Yeah. We're not going to go through all of these, but of the 2,900 players that came to the RCs, here is what in my mind is the top tier of decks. Rakdos midrange with 17.1% of the field, 51.1% match win rate. Mono Green Devotion right behind that with 16.9% of the field, but a farther win rate, 47.9% win rate. Is It Phoenix, 9.8% of the field with a 49.5% win rate, and Mono White Humans with 7.6% of the field and a 53.5% win rate. That is where I would draw the line on the first tier of decks.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking, I mean, if you really, there's arguments about having just like Rakdos and Mono Green on their own tier in terms of like popularity, but because we really can't talk about a performance tier here, because as we'll talk about, the percentage of the field and their corresponding match win rate aren't exactly a 1-to-1.
They do not line up at all, really. So the main surprise to me was that there wasn't really a meta breaker deck in any of these tournaments that caught on enough to steal a bunch of market share at the end of the tournament. There might be something in like Gruul Vehicles, which I'll talk about later, which was around 5% of the metagame. I think at the beginning of the RCs, that was less popular, and then later on it got more popular. But this was super stable. It's Pioneer. This is what Pioneer is.
Yeah, this is Pioneer.
So Shane, this is a stable metagame. Modern is a pretty stable metagame. How do you feel about the difference between these two things?
I was thinking about that because I was looking through your notes today, and I was like, we have two very stable environments for people to be playing. But for whatever reason, it's likely kind of my relative lack of exposure to Pioneer. It's like for some reason Pioneer feels more boring, even though Modern is pretty boring itself. I think that the really interesting thing about Modern is we can still have weeks where it's like, oh, everyone's talking about Underworld Breach this week. Everyone's doing something weird with like Shape Anew now, just because of the card pool depth. Or you can kind of bust out an old weird card to make some 9-mana artifact work. And you can't necessarily do the same thing as often as Pioneer. I mean, I'm saying that I'm looking at Abzan Greasefang, which is a card that literally was printed and then immediately made a 7-mana artifact relevant once again, with Parhelion 7 or whatever the heck it's called. But that just doesn't happen quite as often, and you can't go back to the archives of Pioneer as often as you can to the archives of Modern. So my gut feeling is like, oh, Pioneer looks kind of boring. You don't have as many options for creativity and experimentation. But then I also am like, well, maybe it's just like underexplored at this point. Like everyone was trying to figure out what to play from the known decks for the RCs. Some new decks did appear, like Gruul Vehicles, which then did kind of have a rise in popularity. But I think people right now are kind of like, well, good, I get to stop playing Pioneer. Besides the aficionados of the format. And
maybe unfortunate in that sense. Like I still think it's a little unfair.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think the most interesting thing to me, honestly, is that even though there was a huge consolidation at the top of the field with Rakdos and Mono Green both at basically 17%, Phoenix and 10, Humans in Control at 7.6 and 6.6, that is, I'm going to do math live. That's almost 60% of the meta.
Yeah.
Right there. Those were the only decks above 5% of the meta.
Yeah, there's a long tail here.
In all of that. There's a huge long tail. And Frank in his article lists 20 more decks that starts with Gruul Vehicles, goes all the way down to Jund Sacrifice at 0.4% of the field. But then he also has an other category that had 7.1% as well.
Yeah, so people are playing what they want. They're experimenting, but how do people notice? Like, how do people notice an experiment unless like Aspiring Spike or Canister or like Gabe Nassif or streaming with it? You know what I mean anymore?
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I think a lot of it's on Twitter, right? I think a lot of it is people just trying stuff that they see even at NRG or see at some of the challenges and things like that. But yeah. Lots of one-ofs is what that basically meant, and lots of people were willing to break out their one-of deck and give it a shot. And the win rate wasn't that bad of the other category. It was below 50%, but it was 46.5%, so it had a better win rate than Niv to Light or a better win rate than Bant Spirits did, about the same win rate as Karuga Fires.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, do you want to talk win rates a little bit? Because this is kind
Sure.
of the thing that continually surprises me. I mean, not only about Pioneer, but also about Modern, is what people are playing, even though the numbers do not change. Hardly
Right.
at all. Where it's like
Yeah.
Rakdos at 51%, Mono Green Devotion at 48%, Izzet Phoenix at like 50%.
And note, these are non-mirror, non-buy win rates. So Frank did the work to fix these so that we're not seeing a zillion Mono Green Devotion mirrors within here somehow. You know what I mean? So it's taking all of that data out.
And then we start getting to like a few like 50% plus decks where it's like Mono White Humans, 53.5. This is data we knew 6 weeks ago, right? Where it's like, hey, we know Mono White Humans is good and has good matchups against a number of the more popular decks. And Azorius Control is like 50+%. Gruul Vehicles at 54%. And these are things where it's like, why aren't these decks climbing up in popularity a little bit? Is it just like play style people don't like? Is it stubbornness? Is it just like the fact that decks like Rakdos midrange are decks that people feel like they have agency with?
I mean, why did people play Bob's-on midrange forever in Modern? You know what I mean? I think it's agency, and maybe it's like, these are the cards that I have, and the cards that I have are expensive, and it's a good deck, and I do okay with it. Like, and there's just players that are bad that are just playing the net decks that are bringing the rate down a little bit. Tough to say. But I think a couple of other notes is that one is the spread was narrow in win rates here. If you look at these 25 decks, there was no deck that was below 45.9% win rate in these 25 decks, plus other. So it's tight. It's kind of bunched together. And there was also no deck that was above 55%. So the top range within this is essentially the number one winning deck, I think, was Gruul Vehicles. Nope. Yeah. It was Enigmatic Fires with 55% was the number one win rate in this table. That is wild to me. And the list of decks that were the top 6 performing decks by win rate were all rogues, like Shane was kind of leaning towards. Other than non-white humans, it's Enigmatic Fires, Rakdos Sack, Gruul Vehicles, Humans, Lotus Field, and Angels are the top 6 performing decks.
Yeah.
All with win rates above 52%.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a healthy format, more or less, right? Where it's like Wizards, both through tweaking the format themselves, but also players just having the ability to tech against overly powered strategies and things like that. That creates a format that more or less doesn't have anything that's outstanding, nothing that's too bad. In fact, I would say that it seems like Pioneer has a higher floor than Modern does, which again does not surprise me because of the card pool thing that we talked about, where it's like if you're playing with the cards of this era that are like a functional deck, like you're not going to get maybe quite as many terrible matchups unless you're playing Nibtalite at 40.7%. It seems like you should probably be ignoring that deck for now. But long story short, like it's definitely like a play what you want format if you just want to have some fun if you're at your FNM. And if you want to spike a tournament, win an RCQ, I think you should start looking at some of the data that we have available to us and pick your poison for what you think the expected metagame is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, Frank did a wild thing at least on the tweet that he announced this last metagame mentor with. I'm looking at the article. I don't see the same table. He posted matchup percentages for a bunch of the decks that he was looking at. So it doesn't have all of the matchups, but it does have tons of them showing the actual win rate that they had against each other, which is super interesting to see. For example, the fact that Lotus Field combo beat Izzet Phoenix 84% of the time, Shane. 84% of the time. It went 54-10 against Izzet Phoenix.
That's conclusive.
That's huge. And then on the flip side, Mono Blue Spirits lost to Izzet Phoenix 80% of the time. So 2 of the most polarized matchups on his table, for example, are in the Izzet Phoenix column. They're Lotus Field or Mono Blue Spirits. So if you're going to a place you expect a lot of Mono Blue Spirits, apparently play a whole lot of Izzet Phoenix, I guess is the only thing I would say.
Is anything like appealing to you here, Dave? Again, this is not really like an argument of like, well, how do you feel about Pioneer overall? But like, if you're thinking like, hey, I like going to my Pioneer FNM night. I've got people I like playing with. It's, that we get 16 players every week. I need to get back into Pioneer. What are you looking at?
So honestly, if I were you, which deck would I pick for you?
No, I mean, I know what I'm picking. It's a terrible idea.
Picking? I can't pick for you.
I mean, you can pick for me. Please do it.
Rakdos Sacrifice, Shane. That's the deck I think that you should take.
You know what's funny?
To Pioneer FNM.
This is kind of the deck that I actually thought Jund Sack was going to be like a much bigger presence than it is. And I thought, because I see a lot of spiky players really like these sacrifice decks, but for whatever reason, they haven't truly caught on. I think Raksack and especially Junsack have always been kind of rogue, even though their win rates are quite strong. And you don't have to worry about a lot of annoying triggers like you might on Arena or Magic Online. You can kind of just like quickly do these motions. And yeah, I'm all for it. I have all these cards. I purchased them all. I was planning on getting into it because I've always wanted to really learn a sacrifice deck really well. So maybe it's time, Dave.
So what were you going to pick for yourself, though? Were you going to pick that?
Lotus Field. Even though it's it's like the most anti-Shane deck. But like, I just want to learn a deck like this.
Man, there's no way. There's no way. For me, I'm not touching that.
I have all the pieces. I bought them like a month and a half ago. All the envelopes from TCG trickled in, and I've got 95% of it now. So I actually started putting it into my heavy play sleeves to have like a deck like that. Kind of has a lot of novel pieces that I don't need to move around. So I wanted to see what those were like. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
That's funny. I mean, for me, you guys know what I like to play. In this, people know
vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, of the decks that are in this top tier, I would say Gruul Vehicles is the one that's the most interesting to me. It's not Angels. It's not Mono White Humans.
I would play Mono White Humans, honestly.
You would?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely play that deck. I mean, it's definitely kind of an aggro beatdown synergy style deck, and I think the main problem is it's actually surprisingly expensive for what I don't have. Like, I have a lot of these cards, but like some of the more recent mythics are surprisingly pricey, so I'm not quite there.
Yeah. I mean, I still have Phoenix, and I have Rakdos Midrange, and I have Mono Blue Spirits. Like, I have a bunch of the decks in the 50% tier, so I would probably just go with one of those if I was playing right now still, because I'm me, and exactly. I like those decks.
Well, that's all that matters, Dave.
Yeah. All right. So that's Pioneer for now. What weirdly, the watchword of 2023, early 2023 is stability.
Yeah, which is kind of a good thing to operate in, I feel like. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think if you want to get better, if you're coming into 2023 with like, hey, I'm going to improve my game. I want to get better at some decks. I want to maybe spike an RSEQ. This is exactly the environment you want to be operating in. Is something where it's like, I can take previous knowledge, I can look at the numbers and the stats, I can examine the metagame, I can pick a deck, I can craft my sideboard, I can practice. And until the next set comes out, that might shift some things up. But with Pioneer and especially Modern, it's usually not that dramatic. So I think this is kind of like something where you want that stability, because you can then say, what can I do to take advantage of this? How can I learn and grow in this environment?
Yeah.
And Dave, you're learning and growing. You're playing some Hammer right now. I know that. Not right now, because we're recording an episode of the podcast.
Yeah, I have to finish a league. Hang on one second.
Okay, Stan.
Yeah.
We're in turns. Don't worry.
We're up. Okay, so we talked about the big meta games. What is some new stuff that we saw that's worth talking about?
Well, this was surprisingly challenging. We're at the fourth bullet point. We're at some Cool Decks Inc. And I mentioned this earlier, this deck that we're about to talk about, but it was kind of hard to find some cool decks anywhere besides like digging through some leagues, which is always kind of a little bit of a cop-out. Like, I do want to find something that's cool, but it's also cool because like maybe a top 32, a challenge or something like that. But Modern, like we've been saying, feels really stable. And it's
I mean, I do see a lot of cool decks still showing up on, for what it's worth, and we don't have these on the list, I don't think, of stuff that you've looked at, Shane, but there's a lot of stuff going on Twitter in Modern for sure right now, and especially around Underworld Breach, as we mentioned. And I've seen some interesting stuff a lot of different places. There's still some red-green Storm decks out there. I saw one recently that was a red-green Storm deck with the red-green Goblin cost reducer that reduces red or green spells.
Oh yeah,
by one.
Goblin a Narcomancer or something. What was that thing?
Yep, it had that one in it. So people are trying lots of different ways to make Underworld Breach better. And one thing in particular that you have an example of that, maybe not better, but different.
Yeah.
So the example that you have from this is this deck by Nilsfit that we're finally going to talk about in depth from the Modern Super Qualifier.
Yeah. So this was called Jeskai Breach. Now, when you're like, okay, Jeskai Breach, I know what that does. But this is different. And this seems kind of to be like an auxiliary build, an adjunct from the original. Nilsfit is a player with a deep Magic Online history, so they clearly know what they're doing. And this list isn't just grinding Breach. It's almost like a Storm-esque type list.
Yeah, I mean, it's not any grinding Breach, to be clear. This deck has no copies of Grinding Station in it.
Yeah, so there's 4 Dragon's Rage Channelers, there's 4 Ragavan, there's 2 Baral as the creature suite, there's a couple Teferi 3 for, Teferi 3 things, and then there's like your spell suite of things like Consider, Lightning Bolt, Prismatic Ending, Unholy Heat, Expressive Iteration, Manamorphose, a couple Remand, a single Grape Shot, things like 4 Bauble, 4 Underworld Breach. And my thought on this, how this deck can win, there's a couple of angles of attack, right? Like one, I think it can sort of just dig through the deck and fill the graveyard to pay for escape.
How is it digging through the deck, do you think?
Well, I mean, it has DRC. It has Manamorphose, just to sort of like draw and fill. It has Baubles. It has Expressive Iterations. It just has removal spells. It has Consider, which is something that Grinding Breach does not play, correct? So all these spells are working with some of your creatures, along with the cost reduction of Baral, if needed. Not a lot of these spells actually get reduced with Baral, I will note.
There's one really important one, though.
Which is?
Manamorphose.
Yes, that's the one.
Because Manamorphose, when you cast Manamorphose with Baral out,
you're happy.
It generates mana, right? Like that was a good thing in Storm. And so if you have Manamorphose and a bunch of cards in your graveyard with Underworld Breach, you can make a whole bunch of mana, draw a bunch of cards, potentially fill your library or your graveyard even more. But even if it might just be drawing a bunch of cards to be able to get you to a point where you can kill somebody with a small Grape Shot or a couple of Lightning Bolts a bunch of times. So it makes Manamorphose making mana seems to be the thing that is different about this deck from your standard Grinding Breach.
I do think this is a small Breach deck because you have 8 1-drops that can put real pressure on your opponent pretty quickly, like with Ragavan and DRC, and we know that DRC grows really fast. And you have, the interactive spells and bolts. So you can do things like dig through your deck, fill the graveyard, pay for your escape, and then do some remand tricks. And I don't know the math on Storm very well, but then you can win with your Grape Shot pretty efficiently, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that one thing that's interesting is that over time, so Grinding Breach originally had DRC too, and then Ledger Shredder was printed. And people seem to decide that the optimal build of Grinding Breach was to play with Ledger Shredder. And so this does look like a slightly more aggro version of the deck that maybe takes better advantage of DRC, like you're saying. The only reason I wanted to interject this here is that, Grinding Breach can win by just killing people with Ledger Shredder and Ragavan and stuff like that. It doesn't have to combo off all the time. It doesn't have to get to the, Oracle or whatever you're trying to kill. Even Grinding Breach occasionally plays Grape Shot out of the graveyard to kill people as well. So there's different builds in this zone, but this, like you said, seems to be a small Breach deck. It's not trying to infinite. It's not trying to get through your whole deck necessarily.
Yeah, I've heard it called, some people call it prowess, even though there's no actual prowess creatures. There was in the Reddit thread for the write-up of the tournament, some people were actually players in the tournament, and they were like, yeah, this deck can just win from a aggro value plan. They attacked me, they killed my threats, they breached me for value, just bolted me to the face a few times. So yeah, this deck does not need to have some kind of combo kill. It's just a value aggro breach deck that can also kind of come out of nowhere and just sort of finish you off with a grape shot or something like that.
It's really fascinating how many different versions. I mean, fascinating to me because I like to play red-blue cards, but maybe not fascinating to everybody, just all of the different versions of breach, red-blue decks with breach, without breach, Ragavan with Dragon's Rage Channeler, without Dragon's Rage Channeler, with Murktide, without Murktide. Like, the core of red-blue is just so good. Like, what a reminder this is that there's a niche for a special storm deck that still can kill people with creatures.
For sure. I mean, I kind of like it. I probably could not like min-max this deck enough where it's like I'm eking out the value required to sort of like get someone dead, get them down to 0 life with, a small ball. Like, this feels like small ball Magic. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like,
yeah,
I have some small creatures, I have a bunch of like spells that are doing something ostensibly, and then get myself in a position to win with those tools. And I think that this is probably like a deck that really rewards kind of like knowing positions and knowing like life totals and what you can do to get people to, from 8 to 0 at that point, and like what draws you need to make. And, I think that's the kind of thing like, yeah, if you're into that, I'm sure that if you're like an ex-Storm player, finding ways to play like with this might be pretty fun for you.
Yeah, maybe I should consider it. I've been wanting to play Breach for a while. I like to play Prowess. This is something in the middle of those two builds. So
I did have one more find though. Random find in the deck dump. I said I wasn't going there, but this one was kind of too juicy not to talk about pretty briefly. I picked this one out. It's a Mardu kind of small box deck by Michelangelo Pira. It features the new card Braids Arisen Nightmare from Dominaria United. It's 1 black legendary creature Nightmare, 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. So this deck also has classics like Smallpox, the black sorcery that makes each player lose a life, discard a card, sacrifice a creature, sacrifice a land. The support around all this appears to be removal spells, Fatal Push, Prismatic Ending, Vindicate, Hand Disruption, and Thoughtseize. And you're supporting that discard creature creation package that you need to have the sacrifice fodder.
Did you mention Dam is in here? Dam.
Oh, Dam. Yeah, I mean, if you want a sweeper type thing, go for it. But you have to have Lingering Souls in order to have enough stuff. So this has the playset of our old friend Lingering Souls. Speaking of Obs on midrange, Dave, about 10 minutes ago, along with Timeless Dragon from Horizons 2 to get lands, get lands out of the battlefield and have something to get back out of the graveyard later. Stoneforge Mystic, I guess, is just there.
Sir.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, plane cycling does not put lands onto the battlefield.
Oh, you're right. It doesn't.
It draws them.
Well, it means eventually it does. It gets you have lands in hand to put onto the battlefield, Dave.
Okay, fair.
And Stoneforge Mystic is there, I guess, just to like finish the opponent off without having to have a lot of mana left. Like if you got 2 mana, you can win with Stoneforge Mystic. Like, look, I'm sure this deck is not good, but I'm sure it's fun.
It's also got Flagstones of Trocaire.
Classic.
Did you mention that? Yeah, your classic Smallpox move.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you that when you play this deck and you win with this deck, you have a lot of fun. And that's important.
Probably.
It is a game. You're supposed to have fun. The mana looks terrible.
I think I'm more interested in the first one than this one, but
Yeah, I mean, this was not for suggestions for things to take the next tournament. It's just, hey, check out this cool deck that Michelangelo Piro won with. They won 5 in a row, Dave. That gets you to the top 8 in a lot of local tournaments. That does.
The cards that I'm missing from this deck, I definitely have Braid. Magic Goldfish is telling me that I need Braids, Timeless Dragon, which I guarantee I have enough of both of those cards.
I mean, at least
those
Timeless
are sets
Dragon,
that I opened. Oh no, I opened a lot at Dominaria, like an embarrassing amount. I don't know why. Trying to get Shieldreds, I guess. I need 4 Smallpox.
Well, the Phyrexian Crusader in the sideboard, Dave.
Yeah, that's brutal. I'm not playing with that card. And then Flagstones of Trocaire.
Yeah, that was reprinted.
Fetid Heath. Yeah.
Yeah, the mana of this deck looks simply horrible, but it does have Urborg.
It's got 3 of them.
Yeah.
Who needs 3 Urborgs?
I mean, there's a lot of black mana in this deck. 3? Also, Liliana of the Veil is $20 now, by the way.
Oh, God. Oh, God. Boy, I'm so glad that I sold that box topper when I did.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Although I sold it and got 2 Renin 6, so we'll see if those ever get banned. But, it is what it is.
Did you find anything, Dave?
So I tried to look for decks for Pioneer for right now, and I gave myself some rules. I was like, I'm not going to go in leagues. And what I did was I looked at like challenge top 32s and prelims from basically December 30th until now. So 5 or 6 days of those. And I was stunned at how much on meta stuff there was in all of those places. There was almost no decks that I would consider to be rogue brews at all in the top 32 or going 3-1 or 4-0 in any prelims. Shocking to me. The biggest thing I saw was some people who were trying to play blue-black mid instead of red-black mid, basically. So it was kind of like Graveyard Trespasser control, mid-range control. Going to have some counter spells instead of my
Scarab God.
Yeah, I didn't see the Scarab God. Maybe it wasn't it. And then also some blue-black control. But all those decks, I feel like those are just like specialists getting in there with stuff that they know how to play.
Yeah.
I did see one deck in a league. So I lowered myself to leagues as well. And I looked around a little bit and I found by Funky Monkey from 1229.
This is certainly funky.
It is funky because I can't even tell what is going on with this deck at all. This deck got a 5-0. It is Selesnya. It is a Yorion deck in Pioneer, and it has 42 creature cards, of which there's probably 25 different creatures in this deck.
Yeah, like 10 one-ofs.
4 Kayla's Reconstruction and 4 Collected Companies.
Dave, what's Kayla's Reconstruction do?
So Kayla's Reconstruction's from Brothers War, and it costs X white for a sorcery that says, look at the top 7 cards of your library and put up to X artifact and or creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So it's sort of a Collected Company, except it's not an instant, and it costs 5 to do the same thing that Collected Company would do, except it also gets artifacts. But this deck is wild. It's got Voice of Resurgence. So the 4 ofs in it are Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, sure, that makes sense. Selfless Spirit, Voice of Resurgence, Extraction Specialist, and Knight of Autumn are the 4-0s. All good cards. And then it's just a list of like Ambitious Farmhand, Charming Prince, Remorseful Cleric, Skyclave Cleric, Archon of Emeria, Augur of Autumn, Fierce Empath, Kazandu Mammoth, Nissa Vastwood Seer, Redain, Skyclave Apparition is a 2-of, and then there's an Angel of Serenity
and a
Decimator of the Provinces.
Does this have a combo?
I guess,
the Fierce
I can't find what it is.
The Fierce Empath and the Decimator of the Provinces thing really makes me feel like there has to be some kind of combo here, but maybe not. Like,
I think there almost certainly is a combo here that we're missing that either gets you Angel of Serenity or Decimator of the Provinces, but I don't see how you cheat them into play.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it does have 30 lands. I guess it's a Yorion deck, so you have to have 30 lands. So there's ramp, so it clearly wants to be doing something faster. I mean, I'm sure if I just like Googled probably Fierce Empath combo or something like that, I could get to the bottom of this.
We're not going to do that, though.
No, it's more fun for everyone on the end of their earbuds to be like, you idiots, this is a very popular combo deck.
Yeah, you Fauna Shaman away a Voice of Resurgence, and then this happens. Nothing happens if you do that, by the way. I know that nothing happens. All right, so that's what I found. I'll keep keeping a lookout for Pioneer, but right now I feel like all of our formats are ready for some brews. Maybe we need to bring Spike on just to talk to him about his latest favorite brews in Modern.
I mean, we haven't had Spike on in a minute, so it's always a good time to reach out and say, hey, Stan's gone. Let's have you. Third host.
Yeah. He'll be almost a good enough replacement for Stan.
So yeah, I mean, not a lot of. I mean, this just kind of speaks, I think, to kind of the stability of our formats, right? Which is just like even in the challenges and the what are those other things called, Dave? Prelims. Yeah, even in those, we're seeing kind of the same decks showing up more often than not. So get creative out there. Do something cool.
That's right. All right, the last thing that we're going to talk about.
we're going to talk about
I don't
even
know if we need to talk about it. It's kind of talking about nothing. Phyrexia All-R1 what an unbelievable amount of leaks there are floating around for that right now.
Oh my goodness. Supposedly out of like a box.
It's got to be several boxes at this point, right?
I mean, yeah, unless they just printed a bunch of rares into the packs.
I don't know. It's unbelievable though. So we're not going to speculate about the cards. We don't want to right now. We're going to start talking about spoilers over the next couple of weeks as things become officially spoiled. I just wanted to say we're going to do our best to differentiate between official and unofficial spoilers, but we might also make mistakes. And we record episodes 3 or 4 days before they're released. So time is a flat circle.
I mean, Scryfall usually does a pretty good job, I think, of like not putting unofficial spoilers on their page. So like I kind of use those as like a source of truth, but you know, there's a lot to talk about here. I will say that the set looks pretty interesting. There's some powerful cards. If you're not looking at them, I don't blame you. It's maybe fun to have the spoilers come out from their official sources. I don't like ruining anyone's fun at all, and so I feel bad for all the people who had spoilers and wanted to do something fun with them, or just put them on their Twitter just to get some retweets and whatnot. It does take a little bit away from that, but long story short, we'll talk about them when they're officially spoiled, and we'll do our usual wild speculation about just how good or bad they are.
However, I do have one request, I guess, of people right now. If there are cards that you have looked at, if you're a spoily person and you've looked and there's a card that you want us to talk about that you think we might not talk about, send us a note with the title of it to our Gmail just to let us know that you'd like us to have it on the radar. I think that's an interesting thing we can do this spoiler season since people know the cards, but we're not going to talk about them for a little bit. If there's something you want us to pay attention to that you think we might miss, give us a suggestion. Help us out. Participate.
Love it. Good idea, Dave. Dave, without Stan, I feel like we had a really efficient episode here. And I'm not saying that Stan made our episodes inefficient. I'm saying there's only 2 of us to talk about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're still at an hour 30.
I mean,
so,
perfect.
Love it's longer than last week, I think, maybe.
Oh my gosh, you're probably right. But Dave, I think that wraps up this week's show.
That's right.
So if you have not yet, why don't you subscribe to our podcast? You get the episodes as soon as they drop. If you use Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a rating and a review. We appreciate that. If you want to submit us a question, if you want to tell us what cards are piquing your interest in Phyrexia All or One, anything else, you can reach out or tweet us at The Dive Down or email thedivedown@gmail.com. Again, if you want to support the show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can go to our store to get some merch, get some Dive Down swag at thedivedown.com. Also, shout out to manatraders.com for sponsoring us. You can use promo code thedivedown15, all one word, for 10% off your first 2 months there of renting Magic Online cards. Of course, Barrister and Man, you can get some shaving soaps, body soaps, fragrances, all that kind of stuff. BarristerandMan.com, code thedivedown15 for 15% off your first order. Nerd Rage Gaming, save 8% off your order there with code DIVE8. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Space Blood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and break the meta.